There's a lot of new followers coming along. Let's do a pond update. This is Sugar Hill Outdoors Pond. It's a 2.5 acre pond that was built new in 2021, and it's located in Braselton, Georgia. I was very fortunate to be involved with this project since its construction. We did a lot of habitat improvements before the pond filled up with brush piles, gravel beds, rock piles, stumps, and anything we could think of to improve fish habitat. We stocked 1,000 bluegill per acre about 9 months before the bass ever went in. And it's important to stagger the stocking strategy that way. You want the bluegill population to be established, and you want the bass to have plenty to eat in a new pond. In that situation, the best way to do that is just don't stock the bass. Let the bluegill thrive. We fed them artificially like this to get their weights even higher. We did an interesting genetic experiment in this pond in that we split the bass population between northern bass and Florida bass, and we had them pit tagged so we could tell the different genetic strains apart. I was particularly excited to do this because I've had a lot of experience stocking different genetic strains, and what you hear online and what actually happens when you do this are usually two completely different things. Bass populations are dynamic, and pigeonholing them down into just saying like stock Florida bass to improve your fishery is really not how this is done at all. This is highly complex, and there's a lot of variables that go into growing bigger largemouth bass. Since the bluegill population was so dense, the bass grew extremely fast. But even in this perfect scenario, we're getting a wide range of growth rates. And the interesting part is the Florida bass are considerably smaller than the northern bass. I kind of expected it based on what I've been doing in the past. There's a lot of misinformation around Florida bass, and what's important to understand is where you stock Florida bass is extremely important. Florida bass are warm water fish. They don't do well in colder climates. And again, this is just in Atlanta area. Most people would consider this the deep south, but we're still seeing drastic differences in growth rate. The biggest fish that we've sampled out there so far is 4.1 pounds, pictured here, and it's a northern bass. And just based on my experience over the last almost 30 years of doing this, I've noticed these differences in different genetic strains, but this is the first time that I've ever been able to actually track it, and I'm really surprised at the difference in growth rates. There's a 2-pound difference between our northern fish and our Florida fish. And I really want guys to understand that where you stock these fish is critically important. Even more important than the fish's genetics is the balance of the fish population. Remember, we started this whole situation off in a perfectly balanced fish population, and that means the numbers of bass per acre versus the number of bluegill per acre. That's more important than genetics. I have seen so many times where guys will have an unbalanced fish population, meaning there's too many bass in the population. They need to thin the bass down to get the bluegill population to recover. That's the part that guys just don't understand at all, is that you can have too many bass that are overfeeding your forage base. So if you put, say, different genetics into a stunted bass population, you're not going to get these kind of growth rates just on the genetics. You have to have food for the bass to eat first. So the first step in growing bass at this kind of rate is understanding the balance of the fish population. And I absolutely never hear anyone talk about that.